So around this time last year, we got the news that Orange Cassidy was signed to All Elite Wrestling. And ever since then, Jim Cornette has talked about him. Mostly in a way that saying that he doesn't like him and saying that he's killed the business. Well, after having the match of his career against Chris Jericho at Fyter Fest, I think it's time to say that Orange Cassidy has proven Jim Cornette and others like him wrong. Welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti for news, review, and conversations on all things pro wrestling. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. Ralph, we both saw the match between Orange Cassidy and Chris Jericho. We have seen a body of work of Orange Cassidy for the last year. Is it safe to say that Orange Cassidy has proven the historians and those traditionalists of professional wrestling like Jim Cornette wrong, that Orange Cassidy belongs in the business?
Yeah, and I don't know if the conversation was always so much that he didn't have a place in the business. It depends on who you ask. Certainly, like a guy like Jim Cornette, who, as you pointed out, is more or less a historian, a traditionalist. He wants the traditional big guy versus big guy athletic event. That type of person probably is going to consider Orange Cassidy somebody who, maybe doesn't belong in the main event picture. I think that what Orange Cassidy did in his match against Chris Jericho and his matches against Pac, and a lot of what he's done over the course of the last year has certainly proven that he can wrestle. And I don't think there's so much the conversation has been, does he have a place? It's just, what is his place? Obviously, this past week on Fyter Fest, we saw him in a match against Chris Jericho, which was the main event. I think the argument has always been, one, can he draw, which I think is part of the equation here. And the other part of the equation is, if he can draw or if he can't draw, where does he belong on the card? Is he a main eventer? Is he a mid-card guy? Is he part of comic relief? All of that type of stuff, I mean, depending on what your personality is, will land you on a card somewhere or land you on the show somewhere, as long as you're entertaining and can draw somewhat. But at what point do you decide, where does he belong? This past week, obviously, like I said, we did see him in the main event. And I think that's the bigger question. Does he belong in that position? Obviously, he can wrestle. I mean, we can all probably put that to rest, that conversation to rest, because he did go out there. And as you pointed out, he had the match of his career against Chris Jericho. Probably in comparison to the match that we saw on NXT, those two matches were great. No matter what wrestling company you choose to follow on a Wednesday night, whether it's NXT or AEW, both matches were great and pleasing. And, Orange Cassidy just so happened to be involved in one of those.
Now, I think the original argument with Jim Cornette was cosplay wrestlers like Orange Cassidy will kill AEW, will kill the business. And obviously that has not been the truth. That has not happened. In fact, you can even make the argument that Orange Cassidy is one of their top draws in AEW. He's a top t-shirt seller on Pro Wrestling Tees. He brings in the ratings in the key demographic 18 to 49, including this past week where that match got 362,000 viewers over 355,000 viewers in the 18 to 49 demographic. And his wrestling obviously has proven that he can wrestle, like you pointed out. I mean, he had a great match with Pac. He had a great match with Ray Phoenix, and he had a great match with Chris Jericho. So it's one of those, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me three times, shame on both of us. So without question, there's a place for Orange Cassidy. Has he killed the business? No. In fact, I actually think that he's brought some fans back to professional wrestling. Maybe brought in some new fans to professional wrestling. I think he has a very relatable character. Is he a main eventer? Not yet. If this character evolves, it might be able to main event. It might be able to be a main eventer. And I think going toe-to-toe with Chris Jericho and knocking it out of the park proves that if he were ever given that spot again, it can deliver.
So, Michael, refresh my memory here. There's something you always say about the top shows in terms of cable. What demographic do they usually pull pretty strongly in?
As far as top viewership?
So 18 to 49 is obviously the key demographic for companies, advertisers. We talk about that all the time. You always make a point that there's another demographic that's important for viewership, and that's the reason why a lot of TV TV shows end up in the top 5, the top 10, whatever it may be, because they pull very strongly in one demographic. And what's that demographic?
Well, they pull the top viewership. The top viewership is skewed by the 50 plus demographic. If you look at the Showbuzz Daily, Excel sheet that gets posted every Wednesday, you could see the ones that do well in the 50 plus always have 1 million plus viewers.
Yeah. And I think that's really the conversation that needs to be had at some point. One, we already know he can wrestle. Okay, let's put that to rest. We can both agree, right? Orange Cassidy can wrestle. He can deliver when he has to. Can we both agree on that?
Yes.
The other side of this conversation has to be, okay, he went out there. He had a great match against a guy, Chris Jericho, who's a legend in the business. And now the question has to be, where does he go from here and where do we see him? Is he going to be a main eventer? Is he somebody that we see in that position? And if he's going to be put in that position, what will his ability be to draw? Because ultimately, that's going to be what dictates if he belongs in the position of a main event, right? In professional wrestling, there's been 1 million guys that can go out there and wrestle and put on a clinic and be the most technical guy on earth. But if you don't have a personality and you're not relatable and you can't draw the house, you're not going to be put in the main event.
But he's proven that
consistently.
He's proven that so far. He is a relatable character. He sells merch. He brings in the viewers in the important demos, and he's delivered matches.
Okay. But I'm talking about if you're going to consistently put him in that position to the point where, yes, he draws in the key demographic, but you also have to consider at what point is it where he's drawing in a key demographic, but he's also driving a certain portion of the fan base away. Because when you talk about viewership, and yes, we talk about this all the time, you can't really compare the ratings and viewership now in comparison to what happened during the Attitude Era. But what we can compare is from the start of Dynamite, when it first debuted, they had close to 1 million viewers. And it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. So with Orange Cassidy, and just in terms of with AEW, there's still a good 250 plus thousand people who were watching at the beginning, saw something they didn't like, and aren't watching anymore, at least not watching the show consistently on TV. That you can say confidently in the numbers. Can we agree with that?
Yes, I think some of that does rely on what's going on in the world. But
I'm not going to try and convince people that Orange Cassidy is the main cause of that. But what I will say is this: he's going to drive that 18 to 49 demographic. But you also have to consider this. With professional wrestling and with viewership and all that type of stuff, there is still a good majority of the wrestling fan base that is that 50 plus, or the historian, or the old Attitude Era guy that used to watch Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. How many of those fans are tuning in and saying, oh my God, this guy who is in sneakers and jeans is getting the best of Chris Jericho. I can't watch that. We're not going to know that from this episode of Dynamite or Fyter Fest, but we might start to see that if you put Orange Cassidy in the main event consistently. I don't know what's going to happen with him, but they need to decide what the next step is for him. I could say this confidently. The next step with Orange Cassidy, if they truly intend to put him in a position where he's going to have a more predominant role, an expanded role, and be in the main event and contending against some of these top guys in AEW, the next logical step has to be character development. The guy's got to cut promos. The guy has to show some personality, because ultimately people relate to personalities. People relate to things like that. Yes, I get it. He's the laid back guy. That's a part of who he is right now. But you also have to understand and be willing to accept that that's only going to get him so far. There's a ceiling on that, right? There's a reason John Cena, when he came out and he was doing the battle raps and all that stuff, it was cool and it attracted a good group of a cult following pretty much, but he had to do different things to get past that point. He couldn't just come out and rap from when he first started till now. I mean, could you imagine if he had done that? The act would get stale quick. So he needs to evolve. He needs to grow. He needs to show some type of personality, and then we'll truly see if he can get to that, mid to upper card or main event status. And right now, I guess that kind of remains to be seen, but we need some type of character development from him.
I think the greatest comparison with the crossroads that Orange Cassidy face right now is he goes down one road and it's Eugene. And I made this comparison last year when we had this discussion, when the news broke that AEW signed him and Jim Cornette went apeshit about it. He's basically Eugene. That's his character. 15 years later, it's Eugene. The other way is The Undertaker, because let's face it, the original character of The Undertaker, when you think about it now, is pretty unbelievable. He's a dead mortician. And when you tell non-wrestling fans, like, you know what, it's cool to watch wrestling, and they, most of the time, they'll go, you had a zombie as a wrestler, or a zombie mortician, or a dead mortician as a top guy. He won the WWF championship in his first year. So where does you go from here? And obviously The Undertaker had to change his character, and that's why it was able to last 30 years.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. There has to be some character development. But I think the difference between Dead Mortician and Orange Cassidy is Orange Cassidy is relatable to today's audience. I mean, it's the millennial where, you know, most of the time they're going to be lazy, but when they need to put in effort, they will. And that's Orange Cassidy.
Yeah, I get all that, and I'm not saying that's not true, and I'm not saying that it's not relatable to whatever group of AEW fan base is following Orange Cassidy. They're going to follow him, right? They're willing to embrace him. They're willing to accept him. They're willing to look past the fact that he's not going to go out there and cut a promo. And I don't need to be told, oh, well, you just don't get it. Yeah, I get it. I understand why people like him. I understand the character. I understand what they're going for. My main point is this. If he truly is going to main event on a consistent basis and they're going to take him away from the best friends and he's going to do this and he's going to feud with some of the top guys, he can't just be pigeonholed into this one character. There needs to be a reason for people to get behind him. There needs to be a mission for what he's trying to accomplish. There needs to be something for people to get behind. And the only way he can express that is by cutting promos and by talking and showing personality. Look at some of the bigger personalities in the industry. And you talked about Eugene. The other comparison I was going to make is the Hurricane, right? So the Hurricane, one of Jim Cornette's big arguments was you can't have a guy like Orange Cassidy go against Chris Jericho because it's not believable. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. The Hurricane and The Rock, those two were gold together. They had good matches. The promos they cut on each other were awesome. If you haven't seen that stuff because either you're too young or you just didn't watch WWE back in the day, go and YouTube that. Some of the stuff is just awesome. Eugene, you pointed him out. So comparison to like guys like, where do they see him? Hulk Hogan, over the top personality. And it's also about timing, right? So during the time where Hulk Hogan got really big during the 80s, we were in the middle of wars with the Middle East, and the Gulf War was starting just around 1990, I believe it was. Yep. And everything was red, white, and bullshit, and everyone was into that stuff, right?
Yep.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the biggest names in the industry. Relatable guy because he's drinking beer and kicking his boss's ass. A lot of people can relate to that.
Yep.
You look at The Rock. He's coming out there. He's cutting promos. He's dressing flashy. He's getting women. He's talking about pie and this and that and everything else, and it's awesome, and a lot of people can relate to that. If he's going to get to that point where he's going to main event consistently and they're going to try to put him there, he needs to relate to a larger demographic and not just the small following that is willing to accept him for who he is in AEW. Because if they do that and they try to push him and he's just doing the same thing week in and week out, you're going to you'll get the people that are interested in Orange Cassidy to remain interested because they're already going to buy into it. But you're not going to get the larger demographic and you're not going to attract people and the casual fans to be invested in something. How could you be invested in something if you don't know why the hell this person's doing something? Well, that's the main point.
Here's the thing. When it comes to, and Jim Cornette talked about this in his recent review of AEW Dynamite Fyter Fest, why is he having the matches that he's having? Why does he do this? It's easy. It's a rhetorical question. It's because he pisses off people like Cornette. That's why he does it, And I said this last year, it's rope-a-dope. It makes you think he doesn't care, but then you get a guy like Jericho who then doesn't care because Orange Cassidy doesn't care, and then they both have the match of their lives. I shouldn't say Jericho had the match of his life, but at least the match of his career in AEW. But that's that's what I'm saying. Like, Orange Cassidy is a rhetorical question.
No, I certainly agree with that aspect. And again, that kind of goes back to the approach to the match and his actually ability to wrestle. So, yeah, I think you're going to get the natural storytelling, especially when you get a guy like Chris Jericho, who is looked at as one of the best in the industry and certainly one of the best in AEW, a top tier guy, going against a guy like Orange Cassidy, he probably views him as somebody that he's just going to literally go over easily. And then what happens in the matches. They're able to tell the story like, Jericho didn't take him seriously and now he's getting the best of him. That's a natural storyline. You've seen it time in and time out. You could say the same thing about Rocky and Mr. T. It happened in real life with Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson. So those things do happen.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that can still be separate. They could still tell that story and probably tell that story better if you have him go out there. And it doesn't have to be a crazy promo, but it has to be enough to draw in the casual fan. It has to be where he's going out there and giving people a reason to care about him.
Now, if he starts talking, do you think that might actually end up hurting the character? Because there's let's think about this. Sting did not talk for the entire year of 1997. And he was the most, you could argue he was probably the most over he ever was in his career in 97 without talking once.
Yep.
If you have Orange Cassidy talk, does it lose the mystique and interest that people already have on Orange Cassidy?
Well, again, I think it goes back to where they see him. He could take the gimmick he's doing right now and what he's doing right now. He can continue doing that for the entirety of career, probably be successful, and he might be a good little comedy act because I think we could probably all agree, or at least I hope we can all agree, in the fact that this can only get him so far. I don't think he can main event and be a top tier guy or be a top draw if he's not going to go out there and talk. So he can literally go out there, do his thing, stay in the best friends group, live comfortably and retire as a top, a mid-card guy, a comedy act guy, a sidekick. And I just don't think that can happen where they put him in a main event if he's not willing to go out there and do that. Now, he may alienate some of his fan base because he's going to go out there and cut promos and talk, but it's a give and take. Look, do you say, okay, well, I'll sacrifice the 10,000 people that follow me right now to have 1 million people that are going to watch me on a Wednesday night because I cut promos and now they have something to be invested in.
Good point.
I mean, that's what they got to weigh out. If you compare it to right now, this weekend, right, there's a huge UFC fight. Jorge Masvidal is a guy that was pretty much a journeyman, mostly overlooked his entire career until he started showing his personality. He put a bunch of wins together and he started coming out dressing as Tony Montana, saying certain things, doing certain things where people could actually get invested in his character. And right now, if he wins the title, they're saying that, number one, the pay-per-view tonight is trending to be just as big as a Conor McGregor fight, which is saying a lot. And he could go out there and probably have one of the biggest fights if he chooses to fight Conor McGregor. That might have the biggest pay-per-view buy of all time for the UFC. So, yes, I get it. He's skilled. He can wrestle. But skill set, whether it's wrestling, football, MMA, boxing, I don't care what it is. Skill set is only going to get you so far when it comes to stardom. So if this guy's going to main event, there's got to be some give and take and there's got to be some character development and he's got to cut a promo.
I want to close with this. So in the segment that Jim Cornette talks about this match, before he even talks about the match itself, he says that he would bring the tape to Vince McMahon to show him so that Vince McMahon could then show the WWE roster in a way to, hey, don't leave WWE and go to AEW because this is going to end up to you. Do you think that match is that bad that AEW should be worried about getting future wrestlers on their roster, especially big stars?
No, I don't think they need to be worried. I think that, number one, the match was good. I mean, I don't think you're going to find many people in the industry or fans that are going to tell you that the match wasn't good and wasn't impressive. So I think the match itself was good. And I don't think it was anything overly egregious. I mean, look, it's not like Jericho went out there and, wrestled like Doink the Clown or something and went, had Doink get a ton of offense in. They've pretty much still positioned Orange Cassidy to be taken somewhat seriously and just pinned him as like the underdog here, especially when you consider this. I think that WWE has its own, some could probably argue, cooler version of Orange Cassidy to a certain extent. I think Matt Riddle, if positioned correctly, can be the next big thing. And this is all assuming that all the sexual allegation things are untrue. So that still remains to be seen. But if they position Matt Riddle the correct way, I think he can be the next big thing in professional wrestling. And he's maybe a little comparable to Orange Cassidy in the sense that he can get that key demographic based on his personality. So, I mean, I don't see anything overly egregious in the match that would turn anybody away.
No,
Or based on his personality.
I agree. I think, especially when you think about it, Vince McMahon, this guy has had very many like comedic characters. Like he might see Orange Cassidy and go, "Ha, that's such good shit. He wrestles with his hands in his pockets, pal." You know, that could happen. But I honestly think at this point, guys like Cornette and Jim Cornette himself, I think he's proven, like, Orange Cassidy has proven him wrong in 1 year. Like, the guy can draw, the guy can have good matches, and I don't think he insults the intelligence of the fans like you would think he would when you first see him. The first impression of him that happened last year at Double or Nothing, obviously, people would be like, oh, he's play kicking, he's got his hands in his pockets, this guy's a joke. But now, if you watch him a year later, I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah, and I definitely think they've calmed down his approach. Like, if you watch what he was doing on the indie scene, a lot of the matches were a little egregious in certain spots where that whole laid back, play kicking, whatever, it was taken, that small spot that he's doing in AEW times 10, like on steroids. That's the type of stuff he was doing.
Right.
He's not really doing that in AEW. So that's why I think it's working because, he's still doing the play kicking and the shin kicking. But the reaction you get from like a guy like Pac or a guy like Chris Jericho, where they're just like, what the hell are you doing? And then they get kicked in the face. It's really not that much different than if you watch like an Anderson Silva fight where he's got his hands down, he's playing, he's joking around, and then you're getting front kicked in the face and you're knocked out. Exactly. Not saying that it's to that extent, but yes, it does happen in real life. And to pretend that those things don't happen, you're lying to yourself. Jim Cornette is lying to himself. It does happen. There are guys that will go into a fight with their hands down, and the next thing you know, their opponent's looking up the lights because they got knocked out. It does happen in real life.
I think this has been the most positive you've ever been in an Orange Cassidy episode of our podcast.
I've always said he had talent, and I always said he could wrestle. I said I don't know if he's the guy that's going to main event because Tony Khan and others in AEW have said, well, we see something in him. I still don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to carry the business to the next level. Like I said, I think a guy like Matt Riddle, if positioned correctly, could literally be the next big thing. I think Orange Cassidy's character is too divisive, and he won't attract the casual fan. But that remains to be seen. So I'm sure we'll have this conversation again, maybe 6 months to a year from now.
We probably will. And if you guys missed the conversation that we originally had a year ago, I'll put the thumbnail on the screen right now. Don't forget to share us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.